Oh, well, Saturday is the White House Correspondents Dinner. The president will be there. Oz Pearlman is hosting, and he told us he thinks he's figured out how to read the president's mind. Watch this.
How could I go into that room with the most powerful person in the world who is notoriously impossible to read? Am I right? I've read The Art of the Deal twice. I think I finally figured out how the president thinks. I believe that the moment with the president will be a career-defining moment for me if I'm able to pull off what I want, which means that in 20 years, God help me, I hope 50 years from now, when you read my obituary, when you hear about White House Correspondents Dinners 10 years from now, this will be the moment they talk about if I do what I'm supposed to do.
Well, this is fascinating. Lara Trump is with us, thank heavens. Lara, is the Secret Service aware that Oz Pearlman is going to read the mind of the Commander-in-Chief?
I'll ask him after this. I think we should maybe check into that. Look, here's what I'll tell you. If anyone out there, even a mentalist, thinks that they know what Donald Trump's moves are going to be, he'll prove you wrong every single time, Stu. We know that to be the case. But I think this dinner, I agree that this dinner will probably go down in history. We're still talking about the White House Correspondents Dinner that a lot of people say drove Donald Trump potentially to run for president. Now, I would disagree with that sentiment, but he is prepared. I think it's going to be an amazing night. And I cannot wait to hear some of the jokes to come at a lot of those people in that room.
Now, another question about Oz Pearlman. Do you know if the president has spoken to Oz ahead of the dinner? Have they prepared something?
Oh, that I'm not aware of, but I will be watching right alongside everybody else because, again, I think there will be a lot to come out of this dinner. I think people are going to talk about it for a long time. So I don't know, but I can tell you that the President of the United States is one of the funniest people I have ever met, and so I would be prepared to laugh quite a bit. Do
you have any idea, have you seen any preview of what the President might say to the audience? Because that audience is going to be hostile. They don't like the President.
Yeah, but he has kind of prepared for a hostile audience, and he kind of thrives in that sort of environment, Stuart. I mean, look at the fact that he goes into that White House press briefing room, and I've actually physically been in there with him whenever he's done some of these briefings. It's amazing to watch the way he handles these people. So he's kind of been preparing for this moment his entire tenure as a political candidate and as president. So I think the fact that this is the first time we're going to see him in there, I haven't seen what he's got, to present on Saturday, but he's prepared, and there's no better person to handle that group than Donald J. Trump.
Change the subject. I say King Charles and Queen Camilla, when they visit America, it's not going to be an easy trip. They'll be walking on eggshells. President Trump's not happy with Britain's political leader, Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The Brits are late to the game of opening the Strait. What do you think Trump will say to King Charles?
Well, we know that this president doesn't hold back. Whenever he wants to make his point heard, he'll tell whoever's around, maybe including the King of England. Now, very famously, President Trump was such a huge fan of the Queen, the late Queen, who he talks about his mother idolizing and how he grew up really respecting her so much. I can tell you, going over for that state visit when we went to the UK first term, that was a moment where I think I finally saw the president really starstruck meeting the Queen of England. So he has a lot of respect for the crown. But that said, yeah, he's not been happy with the way the UK and a lot of our allies, quite frankly, have responded to the situation in Iran. They've been very late to the game, if they've been participating at all. And so he'll probably make that known. Otherwise, I think it's going to be a great visit. I'm excited. Eric and I are going to go to this dinner. I think it's going to be another historic event in the course of a couple of days here, Stuart. So I think it'll be beautiful, but I think he'll probably make his voice heard loud and clear.
This is going to be wildly entertaining. Either way, any way you slice it, that will be entertaining. It's great stuff. Lara, as always, thank you very much for being on the show. We always appreciate it. Thanks a lot.